Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. It's good to see you, Daniel.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about a hot spot in the world. It's not like we've never talked about it before, but it stays hot. And we had, as reported this morning, 2 senior senators going to Baghdad. They're coming from the front, and they're reporting. And the way the reports on these are credible people, and I wanted to see if you think they're credible, because they still get a lot of attention, and I hope they lose their credibility. The 2 senators, as one would suspect, is Graham and McCain, and they're over there pumping up one thing. They're not seeming to be worrying about the American people, but they're worried about which way Iraq is going. And things aren't going so well. 13 years isn't enough time to impose our will, and things are worse than ever. So they said, well, the only problem is they don't have enough troops. So they're arguing the case at least 10,000 troops to Iraq and 10,000 troops to Syria, so that we can clean up that mess. And it looks like they're saying, we want the troops back in Baghdad. Of course, my argument's been, we want the troops back in this country, which I think would be a lot better for our national defense.
It's sort of a basic idea of logic, isn't it? That the troops going over there and messing things up is what caused the problem. And now the solution is to send more troops back in. You know, it's like logic. And look at someone like McCain, who is going to tell us which ones are the moderates in Syria. He's been photographed with extremists. He's backed extremists. He goes over there, he has no idea who he's talking to, and he comes home and he's viewed as this great expert. You know, it's hilarious. I only wish that the number of American people supporting their crazy idea was the same as Lindsey Graham's polling numbers. Well, that would be reassuring.
You know, in a way, this must be a victory lap for them, because they got another $500 million to go into training moderates. Like you say, they don't have a very good record of picking the moderates, and I just think it's a total waste. $500 million for training more moderates, but what about $300 million from the NDAA? That's the recent bill that was passed, for $300 million to go into Ukraine, as if they haven't done enough damage up there. So we're going to do that, and it's nobody ever asks the question. Republicans and Democrats are alike. They're all Keynesians when it comes to spending. They just want to spend on different things, and there's no problem. Let the government do it. You know, if it's a liberal, free education. If it's a Republican, free military weapons for the military-industrial complex, and we can take care of it. They never say, who's going to pay for this? How are they going to pay for this? Maybe this has something to do with the labor unemployment force. You know, half the people not being employed, labor force is in big trouble. They never question that, and people who are suffering in this country, they never once want to relate to never asking a question about military spending.
And this is one of the prime examples of the absurdity of military spending, and also why, as you point out, has nothing to do with defense. This was signed over the weekend. The NDAA, Obama initially had vetoed it because it spent too much, and so they cut a couple of dollars out of it, and he signed it. But this, as you point out, includes $500 million for a training program in Syria that the Pentagon has already canceled. It's like the F-35. It's nobody wants it, nobody's buying it. But they can't stop it now because their money's already in the pipeline.
You know, a few years back, the NDAA was really in the news, and it was during the last presidential election, and college kids especially were interested in the encroachment of civil liberties, the holding of peoples without charges. We never heard a word. My guess is that whether it's in the law or not doesn't matter, but they followed the same rules that they've set up. There wasn't a debate in there to clarify this and put some prohibitions, on our government holding people, without charges. So along with the expansion of war, this pretense that we can fight terrorism by creating the greater incentive that creates terrorism. So they never change their minds on things. They keep doing the same thing over and over again. Then they wonder why the rate of terrorism is going up. What is the rate of terrorism in the last 14 years? It's gone up ninefold, something like this. So, and what is the suggestion? They never ask, what was the cause? All they say is more troops, and there they are, McCain and Graham over there. More troops, more bombs, and they think there'll be less terrorism, and it's always based on fear. You ever noticed, like in the newspapers? Just think, I'm amazed, as tragic as that bombing was in Paris, which is a real tragedy, of course, 130 people getting killed, but they have been able to milk this. I mean, it not only made it so that just about everybody in this country wants to expand the war. But even the British people who once thought, well, this war is crazy over here. We don't want the British government and the British military to start bombing. But it looks like now what's happening is Labour rolling over.
Yeah, and it's amazing, too, the people who committed this horrible act and for which they feel they have to go to Syria, none of them were Syrian. They were all EU citizens. So the absurdity is there. But yeah, now Cameron, we just talked about it, I think last week or maybe just before, that Cameron, the British Prime Minister, was going to have a heck of a time getting the authorization to go over there and start dropping bombs on Syria. Then all of a sudden Paris happened and they're clamoring for it. And as you point out, even Labour, which recently the leadership was taken over by Jeremy Corbyn, who's a very left-wing leader, the most left-wing leader they've had in decades, comes out strongly anti-war, appeals to the anti-war feeling of the British people, and here he releases the Labour MPs, allowing them to vote with Cameron for the bombing because he doesn't want to face a crisis within his own party. So he sells out for expediency, for political expediency, sells out his ideals so quickly.
There's one point in NDAA which we would agree with. This is no money to ISIS. Yeah, sure. I mean, they lose total control. And if they do send money and help to ISIS, they're never going to tell us. And, it's only become recently. That's one place where I think the alternate media has done a pretty good job, that more and more people are starting to realize, how close Turkey has worked, with ISIS. And I don't believe Turkey's going to do a heck of a lot without our permission, and planes are getting shot down, and people are starting to realize this, but the majority still see it. You can look at our election going on right now. They just bet the American people want blood. Bomb them, kill them. We're not killing enough. Build up the fear. They're coming to New York. They're coming to Washington, D.C. So they're able to build this fear, and people are easily intimidated. It's just so tragic what's happening, but it really fits into the one world people. This is another excuse, whether it's radical environmentalism or whether it's these wars. They have to come together. I mean, the fact that there's a retaliation in Paris, it's not a French problem. Even though France has their problems with their foreign policy too, it's the fact that is an excuse once again to say we're all in this together and we all have to get together. And even building up this troops, the 20,000, even Graham and McCain pretend, well, this is just going to be part of the 100,000 troops that they're going to get from the Arab nations. Haven't they been talking about this for a long time? And they just don't arrive, and yet the policies never change. And if there's anything, if there's only 10% of what we say is the actual thing, that is that our policy's in sight, it's still ridiculous, it's terrible, except I think it's more like 90% of the reason that they want to retaliate against it. It's not because we're free and not because we have prosperity, it's because they get pretty darned annoyed with us being in their country, picking and hand-picking their dictators and interfering with the oil supplies and all this. But it is amazing that the results and the way the senators respond, because they were considered good diplomats, senior U.S. citizens, going over there and having a press conference in Baghdad to explain why Americans should roll over and send more troops here. I wish the American people would wake up.
It's such an astonishing example of obfuscation and misdirection. They take a legitimate fear, and I'm sure you're concerned about terrorism, you're concerned about ISIS, I'm concerned. Every average American is concerned. So they whip up this fear that we naturally have about something, this phenomenon, and then they misdirect it into pushing what they had pushed initially that created the fear, that created the problem. You know, we all are afraid of ISIS, so therefore we have to do exactly what Graham said and McCain said, when that's what they were saying in '02 that caused the problem.
But you know, even back when debate was going on intensively about whether or not we should go into Iraq, we could find people that would come to our office that had credentials, military and CIA people, that would say, you know, this is not necessary. Even the inspectors, remember the inspectors would come in and say, Saddam Hussein does not have these weapons. But Flynn, the former director of the DIA, he said it wasn't worth it. It was foolish. I mean, he's not one of us as far as our foreign policy goes, but at least he's willing to admit the truth that the war was stupid.
And one of the greatest strategic mistakes in history, he said. It'll go down as. That's pretty serious.
Pretty good criticism. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. And once again, we emphasize the importance and look at what's going on in the Middle East, not only because it's a distraction from our national defense, but it is a serious threat to our personal liberties, because when we're at war, you're supposed to sacrifice liberty. Safety is the only thing that we should be concerned about, and we should be willing to sacrifice a little privacy and little freedom, and even to the absurdity that people are blaming Snowden for this problem, which was an absolute lie. To do that, to blame him for revealing to us what's really going on in this world. But no, the foreign policy has to change, and right now, with our biggest enemy is the control of the propaganda machine, and it's not just coming out of the New York Times and Fox and what we face with, but it's worldwide, and it's all the countries, and they're ganging up on the people. But so far, what I see is the states are weakening. Economically, they can't provide. The military victories are so confusing that people have to give up on the dependence on the state. And right now, a lot of people aren't trusting the government in this country more and more. I just wish they would give up on depending on our government to spend more and more monies and promote a foreign policy that is that generates the threat of terrorism against us. That would go a long way to securing peace and freedom in this country. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.